5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
Coming right back at you with part 2 of the Self-Reliance analysis with Mynaa Miesnowan. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we have a lot to cover today. And luckily, Mynaa took the time, trouble, and dedication and respect to me to lay out some more notes for us. So without further ado, I will not keep you guys waiting, unhinged in your seats or in your cars or wherever you so choose to listen to your podcast at. I don't know, maybe you like to sit by a tree or swim in a lake. Well, that won't work too much unless you're super rich and you have like waterproof headphones. And that's cool for you. And I'm glad. But did you utilize self-reliance when you got all your riches? Are you self-made? Likely you probably aren't because, well, you are in a sense, but you also aren't. There's kind of a two sides of the coin. You can have your fate and you can have your destiny, but I don't know, I'm rambling on, but here's a excerpt from Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. Beyond Good and Evil, Chapter 2, The Free Spirit, Section 29. It is the business of the very few to be independent. It is a privilege of the strong. And whoever attempts it, even with the best right, but without being obliged to do so, proves that he is probably not only strong, but also daring beyond measure. He enters into a labyrinth. He multiplies 1,000-fold the dangers which lie in itself already brings with it. Not the least of which is that no one can see how and where he loses his way, becomes isolated, and is torn piecemeal by some minotaur of conscience. Supposing such a one comes to grief, it is so far from the comprehension of men that they neither feel it nor sympathize with it, and he cannot any longer go back. He cannot even go back again to the sympathy of men.
Yeah, exclamation point too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you make of that? I'm asking a question.
He enters into a labyrinth. He multiplies 1,000-fold the dangers which lie in itself already bring with it, not the least of which is that no one can see how and where he loses his way, becomes isolated, and is torn piecemeal by some minotaur of conscience. He's speaking to
Well, he's articulating something, right? Like,
yeah,
very, it's very, I don't know, only so many people had put it in so many words before him, you could say.
It's scary to be alone. It's scary to walk through the labyrinth in the dark and not knowing your way.
And it's counterintuitive too, because if you have a walled city, why would you ever wander away from it, right? If you have a kingdom, why would you ever leave it, or why would you betray it?
Because
maybe
it's a miserable existing. It's a miserable and trapped existence living in a prison.
Right, but isn't that betrayal of duty? To
leave?
Right. Well, I mean, if we're speaking of the king's duty specifically, in this case, like I'm thinking of, you could think of the Buddha, right? You're speaking of, prisons. His father tried to shelter him from the world to keep the prophecy from becoming true, but it turns out, going off of that legend and that mythos and that story, if we follow that line of thought, then it's like, well, within the Buddha's fate and his destiny was that his father actually secured his destiny as, it's like, and, there's a tragic, that's something tragic for a king. We've seen this before in mythology and art.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's not the ending you wanted. you actually tried your best to avoid that. I guess it goes, you could think of Wagner's Wotan, right? Like in
Voton?
Wotan, Odin, within the mythos that he recreated in his art, Odin made these deals, and then, he couldn't renege on him, right? Because the duty was like, it was etched into his spear, and to go against it is to break his spear. And, like he could, it's in there that at the end of the day, I guess for being a free spirit, you go through Nietzsche and then you see that, oh, wow, there's actually a lot to this, that the line is narrower than you think, or maybe you would say the labyrinth is twistier than you might otherwise assume, because where are you going and why? And again, why would you go anywhere else in the first place? If you have safety and comfort over here, it's a counterintuitive thing in terms of self-reliance. It seems like for the rugged individualism and that kind of notion that served America as a sort of engine in the beginning, that it wound up being a counterintuitive way to organize and philosophize your country and your people and to tell its mythos, because, it just didn't bear out on a large scale. Because, I guess, there's decadence, right? The country was founded in Christianity and democracy. It's like even Plato's like, when even Plato says democracy is the worst, yet he decides, and what is that, right? Someone tells you, hey, this is the worst, but, do it anyway.
Yeah.
Like, what do you even make of that? The sage is a weird phenomenon, you could say, or the,
but that's,
you see,
that's
they inevitably make sacrifice, though, because you see it like, Odin did it willingly, right? Plucked out his own eye.
Mm-hmm.
That was a man dedicated to wisdom in warfare, and a bunch of other things too. The mythology is actually, to my mind, it's actually leaves less unconscious room for all sorts of weird pathologies to develop. It's actually, because the whole thing, it's predicated more on balance than good and evil, or, there's a notion that it all ends someday. And I guess you could say that's Ragnarok. And it's a pretty easy conception. This, like, I think of Zapf, let's say, right? He talks about, you look to life and you see in the springtime it blooms. And then there's seasons where corpses just whip the ground. And, it's natural that people would look to the world and see that, oh, it comes to an end. I come to an end. There's some larger ending. If I can see that I'm here now and that we were there then, I could see that there's some logical ending to this. And I guess now we're getting off into the weeds in terms of keeping things moving, but it is an interesting element to all this to discuss.
It is.
Supposing such a one comes to grief, is so far from, by the time Odin plucked out his eye for wisdom, I'm pretty sure by then he had already learned to read the runes.
Yeah.
And, it's telling that one of the most important things about Odin as explorer and father and all these other things is that the most important thing that he wound up doing was reading the runes that were drawn on Yggdrasil, right? The world tree. And the notion is, and, I recognize that voice. That's father's voice. That's dad's voice saying, this is the sense we're laying into things. This is what we've come up with. And it's not even like that was a conscious process. It's more like by the time culture came to exist, they couldn't even, if you think about it, humanity for the past, they could look backwards and they could speculate and they could create, right? They created, it's as much art, mythology is as much art and a lot of other things as it is, let's say, a unifying story or a culture of people. And, that's the thing about even the modern American mythos is like so many other mythos is that, these were whipped up in the course of the last few centuries, and a lot of it very recently in the last century or two, because, the stories of people moving and changing over time, it's like, well, a lot of it in most places, it's like not even necessarily just one group of people. People have lived there, people have conquered there, people have been conquered there, people have done what they've always done, which is, despite the slavery and warfare and all the stuff that's always gone on this planet, is that they've lived their lives and they've traded and they've hustled and they've hunted and they've made more babies.
and
and the framework of it is represented. Yeah, and it's an organizational model, and mythology works on a small scale. And the question that we're watching, the questions that people are asking, and what we're bearing witness to is, okay, like, what does it look once these scales start tipping? In terms of, we are beyond any kind of, it seems like, right, we're beyond any one, that tendency to the Apollonian of unity and purity. It's like, to try and back to the metaphor of, well, I guess it's not our metaphor, but, back to the proverbial metaphor of, standing in the river, let's say, it's like trying to stop the wind. And it's been this way a long time. I mean, the conceptions in the history of philosophy, go far east, it's been said that this world's always been on fire. One of the only real things here is change. One of the only truths is, things aren't what they seem, and where they aren't what they appear. Grab a drink.
Things aren't what they appear.
No, and that's what think about it, right? You have the notion of disillusionment, and it literally means to be freed from your illusion. And you can question, is that a good thing? Because you see that, as people have observed, and especially in psychology, that people actually need illusions of some sort. And it's a reflection of needing order. And part of order is subjugation. Part of order is rank and order. It's or rank itself.
Well, our illusions are what make up our reality, make up the subjective reality, and what everyone else also sees, the illusions that everyone sees. That's kind of what we agree to be the probable, most likely reality.
Right. And here's the question for you is like, but when it's your life on the line, how much do you want to hedge your bets? You're just gonna believe, you're just going to, and there's a reason why, like, different cultures and places and peoples at different times have understood that, there's, I guess, here's a way to frame it, that atheists have always existed.
Can I just say something really quick?
Sure.
Yeah. I just want to point out that there is a difference between illusions and delusions, right?
Yeah, you want to frame that?
Yeah. So with like an illusion, that's like something that you see, right? Something that you hear, like it kind of involves the senses, right? Delusions, on the other hand, they do not involve the senses. They don't really involve seeing something. They involve thinking or believing something that you haven't really even had illusions.
Difference of internal sight,
right? Yeah, it's
external sight and internal sight.
More the
if we go back to Odin, think about it. He gave up one of his eyes, and as predators, as hunters, as warriors, as even just everyday people, right? To lose an eye is huge. It just is, because it's one of the, we are very heavily, we're so visually oriented. And so, as a result, what the information we take in, mentally oriented, that like, we don't even the way our sense of smell, like we're blind to our own sense of smell, basically. Other animals can smell from miles away. It's their most potent organ. And there's a few predators where their eyeballs are the most important thing. You got snakes who sense heat and vibrations, and spiders and all sorts of creatures who perceive the world in different manners. And then with us, we're no different. So we have our internal and our external limitations in terms of, well, what exactly are we seeing, and how are we processing it, how are we understanding it? Like, it's you could question, like, is a limitation of well, honestly, it almost seems like where we're most limited is conception itself, imagination itself.
Yeah. And it actually,
it's like we forget to see the unseeable takes a hell of an imagination. It takes a lot of questions.
It
takes a lot of effort. Like, to work that out is, over time, it's like, well, that gave us everything.
Yeah. And I will say that,
like anything we have that we may like, it's like, well, that came from this process. If Odin's willing to pluck out an eye, he wasn't, and it might seem insane, but it's like, no, he was actually making the worthy trade. And Nietzsche talks about this sort of thing too, when he mentions blood sacrifice. He says, like, what, you're so stingy with yours? Like, you're not going to make one. He doesn't reference this in terms of mythology or Odin, if I'm thinking of it correctly. It's just, one of his aphorisms. It's something along the lines of blood sacrifice, and he's got quite a few along those lines and along the lines of pain and steering into the pain, if you will. And you're actually you're carving out that space on the inside, right? Like, you're growing something new. You're seeing, or making room for something new. There's many different ways I suppose you could conceive of it. And if we go back to even Nietzsche's here, right? He's saying, like, you're navigating this internal thing, and that there comes a point where, because you're you and no one else is you, and because they have their illusions and delusions, and because you have yours, it's like, you guys, you can occupy the same space, but you might as well be on two different continents in a very real sense. And this is the notion that, people aren't equal. The depths of thoughts and feelings in people, it's clearly not equal. If it was otherwise, all things equal, it's like, well, everyone would be Wagner, everyone would be Nietzsche, everyone would be anything they wanted to be, right? Like, we could believe all sorts of delusions, right? Thinking of the specific and correct one.
We can.
Yeah.
I'm going to take advantage of our talk of delusions and illusions, and I'm going to move on to our next, where we left off on Emerson.
Oh, wait, we're not there yet, though. So back to why it's so counterintuitive, right? Because the notion is to go along with everything, right? Yeah. Especially, and again, because here's the thing, the standards have been set in the Apollinian mindset, that the standards have been set. And in fact, they are really high. They're really high. They're actually, from the outset, they're unseeable. They're unreachable. That's how high they are. And people don't realize this, and they don't want to cop to this a lot of the times, but that's how high the standards are. So the notion is, okay, and how do they get there? It's like, well, they were the ones who laid sense into things. They were the ones who created. So in the case of the beginning of this essay, Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson, I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter, which were original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe our own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius, right? So to believe what's true for all men, right? That's an Apollinian dictate, actually, right? If to say that, and to lay the sense, and to want to unify in the way that artists do, in the way that philosophers do, in the way that even the religious instincts say, because it's, in a sense, so much of this is very natural. I'll keep reading here. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For the inmost in due time becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. And this is Heraclitus, and Emerson actually knows this, and he's going to get into this too. I'm just referencing this. Familiar as the voice of mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they said it not at books and traditions, and spoke not what men, but what they thought. Right. So again, the notion is like, oh, this is why they stand out. They stand out because they weren't zebras with, the zebra may have a unique stripe pattern, but like, when it's in the herd, like, good luck seeing it. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmaments of the bards and sages. Yes, this is your own labyrinth, right? We listen. There's a reason why we rank the sages and the bards so high, let's say. But inevitably, one is about, to quote Nietzsche himself, and it's even a Buddhistic notion, right? It's many a tradition's notion to forever remain a student is to be negligent, right? It's to be a bad student, actually.
Be a poor favor, or like you wouldn't be returning your favor to the teacher.
Well, if the master pours his heart, right, into this world, and I mean this all sincerely, not from a cynical perspective, not from a, we're talking about like, you could see, it's Nietzsche's poetry, let's say. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought because it is his. Right. And this is the problem, right? We see, maybe you actually do see that the standard is really high, right? So if the standard is that high, what the hell do you have to offer? Right? It's daunting, and it should be. In every work of genius, we recognize majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility, than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. So last thing to say here is that last week you brought up the example of what we call striking while the iron's hot, or maybe it's also in the vein of the early bird gets the worm. And yes, it works, but that's actually not what Emerson's talking about here. It relates. You could say it would fit into this just fine, but he's talking about, again, back to the labyrinth, something even deeper, because it's not so much that it actually winds up being Socratic, because at the end of the day, he's saying like, oh, you're taking other people's virtues. What of yours? Like, oh, you actually don't have any. Right? It's actually a serious challenge. And it's why you throw people like this in the lake usually. That Emerson wasn't thrown in the lake or tarred and feathered or hung or, who knows what. It's actually like, I don't know. Maybe they were a little bit more refined around him, I guess. I don't know. At the time, a little less barbaric. I don't know. Or maybe thousands of years of Christianity had made him meek enough to tolerate someone like Emerson. So I brought up Nietzsche last week as well, Schopenhauer's educator, and I'm going to read just the first paragraph. I'm not going to, we're not going to dally too long, but I'm not going to say it's not imitation. That would be poor representation, because what you got to remember about Untimely Meditations essay series is that it's actually closer to his time as a professor, from The Birth of Tragedy, his first work, which, I was talking to credit to Essential Salts, Keegan is awesome. He's got an awesome Nietzsche podcast, right? I hope you have him on. He was talking about that because I had asked him about a foreword that Nietzsche had written later in life that I'd heard about, but I hadn't gotten it right. I hadn't found or looked for yet, really, that he had written later in life, assessing his work, because he also assesses it in Ecce Homo, and I think he's a little bit. I think he has a better perspective on it, actually. But in a certain sense, I think you can understand Nietzsche's sentiment from what Salt shared with me, and he said, that he said maybe it was an anecdote that Nietzsche said something is in one of his notebooks or something that, his thoughts were, of that time period writing The Birth of Tragedy, of like, oh, Professor Nietzsche, that dunderhead, like he didn't even see him as the same person almost, or basically, right? And if you think about it, I bet you can think of your own life and go back to like age, whatever, like, you as a little larval form, right? Like you as a younger human being. And it's like, can you really identify much with that? Can you really say that was you, or, how much of your world was actually controlled or dictated by you even? Did it seem like you had any choice?
Most of it doesn't really seem as if you do.
Yeah, and maybe that's why a lot of people get bored and stuff, like in those directions, right? If you, I think it was, I want to say, it sounds like something Nietzsche could say, but I want to say it was in one of Bukowski's poem. He said, only boring people get bored. I don't know if he was the first one to say that, but I almost want to say he is.
I think that is from Bukowski.
Yeah, I want to say he was the first one, like, the first one again. So if he's the artist and you had that thought, you'd be like, okay, damn, like I'm seeing myself reflected in this world. Is that enough permission for you to be you? How much more permission do you need? Like, are you just gonna, and it's not, because you also understand that for the longest time, again, people just trying to get by. They have been, it also betrays something about us though. And this is where we get into Zaphian territory, because the notion is if, we evolved to think, and it's one of the most profound things about us, and it seems to differentiate us from every other creature we've met so far, or come into contact with, then what is it that we say things like, oh, don't think about it, or don't think too hard, or don't worry about it too much. And it's like, oh no, maybe you should, maybe you're supposed to, or do we just take our crown off that quickly and throw it away?
That's what a lot of people
we don't have antlers, we don't have teeth and claws like the other animals, but we have this. Yeah. And you're telling us not to use it. Oh, we shouldn't think, or we shouldn't think too hard. We should, and I get it, because if you go to the bottom of the barrel, right, at the bottom of society for a long time, books might as well be boxes, just filled with like headaches. What good does it do you? Like, what does it actually bring you? Can you eat it? Like, it's, on a practical level.
Yeah.
In an emergency situation, a book is like fire starter. Let's say is one way to look at it. Or
and lots of people are afraid to think. They're afraid to start a fire.
Oh yeah, well it's good reason, right? It's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. I love fire personally. I can stare into one for hours.
Oh yeah, were you a little pyromaniac when you were a kid? Maybe you shouldn't answer that.
No, I was though. Well, so I grew up in Coeur d'Alene, and on 4th of July, you can just light up.
I know.
All over the place, right?
I say, where we were at, we didn't even need to do that. Like, you run experiments. You're like, okay, what happens if we put this bottle rocket in this piece of cake?
Yeah.
Like, what happens if we set up boards and start throwing fireworks at each other? And the answer is, well, the forts got burned down, but man, it was fun. And it's like, shit, you think about it, like, last few years and kids, and like, man, for kids who miss out on that kind of play, it's just like, they're missing out on, entire worlds.
Yeah. But they live in a different
domains.
So that we didn't miss out on them.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, who can say, right? It's an old, what do you call it? Not aphorism, but saying, do you know the one, the Eastern parable?
I'm not sure, but I know there is the, one day, like adults who are like, oh, in my day.
Well, okay. One day a man's horse runs away, and the neighbors see, and they say, "Oh, how bad? What bad luck?" And he says, "Good, bad, who can say?" The next day, the horse comes back, and is leading 4 mares behind it, and the neighbors go, "Oh, what good luck!" And then the farmer says, "Good, bad, who can say?" And then the next day, while trying to tame the horses, the farmer's son falls off and breaks his leg. And the neighbors say, "Oh, what terrible luck. Good, bad, who can say?" The father says. And then finally, the next day, the military comes through and by de facto, enlist all capable of age men, but the farmer's son having a broken leg did not have to get drafted to war. Good, bad, who can say? Maybe war would make him stronger. We don't know. Right? Like, in the context of the story, we're good, bad, who can say? That's where that one ends. It's very similar. If you think, it's similar to Turtles All the Way Down.
Yeah, I've heard that from Alan Watts, that story.
Oh yeah. No, those guys are fun. As philosophers, like, I think they missed the mark. You say, right? Like, they work to expand the eye and expand the mind, and that is always a credit. But in terms of, like, it's funny. Like, I don't know, maybe heroic doses of mushroom should be mandatory. But then I think, like, oh, dude, that's people playing with fire. They shouldn't. Like, that's Prometheus. Like, that'd be too many men receiving fire from Prometheus.
Yeah, Alan Watts was a smart guy, but he was a little bit too
out there.
He was too lost in his illusions and delusions.
Yes, it's a danger of not just psychedelics, but also the territory period. Because again, we're concerned with a practical ethos of action. That's what this comes down to. It's not following other people. It's not imitating other people. It's understanding who you are and what you are, and what you are is just is important as who you are.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Arguably more important, because there's honesty in that, and who you are is like, well, good luck. Answering that.
Yeah. Who are you?
What the answer is as many as there are people.
Well, who are you is perhaps easier to answer than what.
Well, what's spooky is when they start going, okay, I'm this and everyone else is that. It's like, things go back to thinking is dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and then maybe that's why, and then it makes sense. Now it begins to make sense when people say don't think, and you look and you go, okay, yeah, for most people it's very dangerous. I think, like,
you have manic episodes,
modern America demonstrates that. Oh, was that?
Well, then you have manic episodes, right? Yeah, people are
sure.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm not human. You people are human.
Yeah, that happened. There's drug-induced psychosis, and I think, the definition of conscious, like consciousness as such doesn't preclude states of, you could say, mania or mental illness by default of not being what we would consider, let's say, mentally ill.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be schizophrenic to have a manic episode. You don't have to be schizophrenic to become OCD or weird about things.
Yes.
Like you can see it in the way, I think you can see it form. This is the thing. You see it parent, like Cesar Millan, right? He says, there are no bad dogs, just bad dog owners. It's actually very Lao Tzu, right? It goes like, I think the old Taoists say there's no such thing as a bad student, just bad teachers, right? And it's like saying there's no such thing as a bad medium, just a bad artist. And if I think about that, that seems really true to me. There's no such thing as a bad medium, because what the artist surprises you with is going, holy shit, you could do that? Like, we didn't even know that was possible. And that's human ingenuity and human creativity. On that level, that's always been impressive, right? That's always been a high mark. So now if we go onward with Untimely Meditations, Thoughts Out of Season, Schopenhauer's Educator, Nietzsche's essay series from way back when. A traveler who had been to many countries, peoples, and several of the Earth's continents was asked what attributes he had found in men everywhere. He said, they have a propensity for laziness. To others, it seems that he should have said, quote, they are all fearful. They hide themselves behind customs and opinions, unquote. In the heart, every man knows quite well that being unique, he will be in the world only once, and there will be no second chance for his oneness to coalesce from the strangely variegated assortment that he is. He knows it, but hides it like a bad conscience. Why? So, and if we're going to say we learned anything from psychology of the last few thousand years and the history of the last few thousand years, it's noting that, life and perception and human consciousnness, like, none of these things are quite apparent. And depending on where people come from and the circumstances and the weather patterns that play out in man and the world, what manifests is, we see that these things happen in patterns, just like everything else in nature happens in patterns. Like, it turns out chaos is a pattern we can't see yet. But what we know is that we have to have some sort of order to things.
Yeah. Or at least we desire order.
Right. So it's like, it's not necessarily just cowardice. It's not necessarily, if you actually esteem a master, if you esteem a high value and standard, right? Like there is honor in that. Mm-hmm. There's a question of what you do with it, though. Yeah. I guess it's the difference of shit. I guess a poor marker comes to mind as like a pity.
Yeah.
Like,
do you
why
ever desire to be a slave and always follow your master?
Okay, well, let me ask you this: have you ever noticed anyone looking at you with pity?
Yes.
Yes, and when you see it, did you see? Because it manifests in it's a range of fundamental resentments is what it is. And it can range from very sweet to outright hateful. Have you ever seen a look of pity that did a poor job of masking its contempt or its hatred? Have you ever seen that? It's almost like the thing behind pity is like, oh, I would destroy you if I could, but I'm pretending to be civilized, therefore I pity you.
Well, it's that why are you like this? Why must it be like
this? Like, I want to beat you some more, let's say. It's revenge, like Zarathustra talks about this, or Nietzsche, I'll leave it like that. He talks about it, and he talks about it, the eternal recurrence of pity, of judgment, of these things, this ball that was set in motion a long time ago. We'll keep moving though, because already, like, we haven't mentioned it yet, but look at the parallels, right? I read from an artist the other day some opinions that weren't conventional. Here's Nietzsche as, philosopher and teacher and artist, right? Talking about, and I guess we're about to get to the artist, from fear of his neighbor, who demands conformity and cloaks himself with it. This is why he's hiding it like a bad conscience. But what is it that forces the individual to fear his neighbor, to think and act like a member of a herd, and to have no joy in himself? Modesty, perhaps, in a few rare cases. And, again, you can think of the Stoics, right? In a few rare cases. For the majority of it is idleness, inertia. In short, that propensity for laziness of which the traveler spoke. He is right. Men are even lazier than they are fearful, and fear most all the burdensome nuisance of absolute honesty and nakedness. Artists alone hate this lax procession and borrowed manners and appropriated opinions, and they reveal everyone's secret bad conscience, the law that every man is a unique miracle. Excuse me. They dare to show us man as he is, to himself unique in each movement of his muscles, even more that by being strictly consistent in uniqueness, he is beautiful and worth regarding as a work of nature and never boring. When the great thinker despises human beings, he despises their laziness. I think of Heraclitus here, aside. For it is on account of their laziness that men seem like manufactured goods, unimportant and unworthy to be associated with or instructed. Right. And now, and like, that's an important note, because even if Nietzsche were to see himself honestly as a dunderhead back when, because there is a vein of pessimistic thought in this, and naturally it's Schopenhauer's educator, right? So, and there's more to it than even this, but I'm not even going to we're not even going to get into that. This is just some kind of background and consideration, but you hear it in pessimistic thinkers. It's almost like this sad obligation, right? It's almost back to the kingly, Wotan's tragedy, right? Like we're almost back in that territory again. It's like, well, why is it tragic? If man is beautiful, why is it tragic? Like, why do we even have these thoughts? I mentioned earlier, atheists have been around since forever. So have pessimists. They didn't have a place to express, like no one was interested before, or they killed themselves, or they, didn't care to live in the first place, or other things, right, over time. And they never really had a voice. You take something like Zaf, and Zaf is actually the first one to create, here's what makes Zaf great, and unique. He was the first one to create that mythology of the most direct, we're not reframing the past, and we're not considering it in its modern conditions and apprehensions. Nihilism, pessimism, all its modern incarnations. He says, no, it goes all the way back to the beginning of time. The hunter went out to hunt, and somewhere there, sitting by the side of the pool where he knew the animals would gather, he felt a certain oneness with everything, and he lost that bounding of the tiger's blood. And, he wasn't seen from a herd again, but he was, or it wasn't, not in this lifetime, but they found him again, a month later, dead by the watering hole. He literally
became a poison.
Yes. He lost the will to live, and that's exactly it. It was a burden. And what Zaf does actually, in a very real sense, is he boils down, there's the birth of tragedy. I think the line he uses is, he says, a breach in the very unity of life. And I don't remember the exact line from Birth of Tragedy, but I want to say it's something either similar, strikingly similar, or maybe an echo, because back to the notion of even Emerson earlier says, I say earlier as in earlier in history, because remember, Emerson lived before Nietzsche was even born. So Emerson says, imitation is suicide. But in you see here, Nietzsche is expanding these thoughts, like Zaf expanded the mythology in such both a directly expressed manner, and also he backs it up with his scientific and logical rationale. And I think it's pretty spot on, right? Because to me, it's like, well, he condenses, Freud, Jung, Nietzsche. He condenses a lot in a little in this great little package. And there's only so much he wrote because he was busy climbing mountains. He was a mountain climber.
Yeah. I wonder if he spoke German.
Probably.
Of course, I know Nietzsche read Emerson. He read Emerson, the translated version. It was translated into German when he read it.
And it's, what do you call it? So I think of this more like a musical call and answer, and you know exactly what I mean, right? Oh, look, there's a banjo solo. Oh, and he's going in that direction. And oh, look, the fiddle answers, right? Yeah. Or it could be guitars or whatever, or vocals. Yeah. So let's see. Well, I think there's just a little bit. Wait. When the great thinker, despises counter their laziness, seem like manufactured goods. Be yourself. All that you are now doing, thinking, and desiring is not really yourself. I don't remember if I said that or not already, because we got off on some weeds there, but that was the last bit from that opening paragraph of the essay Schopenhauer's Educator.
Yeah.
So I'll read this note here. What's a liberated spirit? like Zap says, it's not just a conscious scrub. It's not a scrubbing of your conscious ideals or your conscious notions of life, because as psychologists of the last 100 years, have demonstrated and witnessed and studied and expressed, and the philosophers too, right? There's a lot of mental illness in this. Right, as Nietzsche says of the will, because look, I think of, I guess, my own theory, and I know it echoes others or sounds, maybe it even sounds, directly like others, but, I have my own conception and angle on it, I suppose you could say, but it's like, yeah, I see mental illness is actually disordered will. So when you see Westerners who are mentally ill and they're screaming and they're upset, it's like, obviously they're upset because they have no control in their lives in a way that most people can't imagine, because it seems like their mind has been swallowed up inside itself.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how does that?
Have you ever seen those like YouTube videos that like simulate what it's like to be schizophrenic?
That's spooky.
Bro, it's whack, dude. It's like super. It'd be such a terrifying existence. Like you're just sitting there, you're all paranoid. People are outside. You start if you hear knocks, you hear
eat not just a heroic dose of mushrooms, but also smoke a lot of meth. I bet you would get something similar. Or I bet you'd get something more accurate.
It's spooky and it's terrifying.
Oh yeah, this is not medical advice. It's not legal advice. You got to make these disclaimers these days.
Well, I would hope that people would have the sense to not do that.
It's a line don't knock a teach, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and Nietzsche goes on, okay, I'll read this to the next line because I just had a few paragraphs here. We're not going to go through all of them, but it's interesting just because, look, he's still answering Emerson. Every youthful soul hears this call day and night and trembles throughout because thinking of its liberation, it suspects its measure of happiness is determined from all eternity, a happiness it can never achieve so long as it lies in the chains of fear and convention. And it's like, well, that's quite articulate for a child, but sort of, right? Like he's definitely on the money, right? Yeah. So yeah, let's go on ahead and keep moving forward because we're actually there. But I think we had read like the few paragraphs before it, maybe even, or maybe not.
Yeah, no, I read like the few paragraphs before that. We read everything up to that point.
Yeah, and I know we at least read it. I guess I was saying, okay, Emerson's words, trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string, and that's, it's like, okay, well, why do you need a master and why do you need a dad and why do you need someone or something to show, like you need something, right? Because it's like, well, otherwise if everyone is subject to their own illusions and delusions, then how can you trust yourself? How do you know when you're not off in the weeds? And the answer has been for all of time, people have been there to correct each other's visions. And sometimes it's maliciously, and sometimes it's with the utmost love and care. Back to the need of rank and order, right? We die without it.
Yeah.
Or you die, or, as an explorer in the labyrinth, right? There is no guarantee that you make it out or to the other side or whatever your conception. Because here's the notion. It's like, well, you might not know what being free is or what the outside looks like, but you definitely know what would be different from where you're at now.
Yeah.
It's like weird in that manner. If you could say that, within the internal labyrinth, you're subject to your own, you're actually, what you're doing, I'd say probably is more like you're mediating this process of that notion of trusting yourself. But there's a question of how much of what is in you has been instilled specifically to tell you to doubt yourself, to tell you you're wrong, to tell you to declare bankruptcy on your own experience, to tell you that that's not what you saw, that's not what you felt, that's not what you should be thinking, that's not what you should be feeling. If we we go straight to Orwell, where he talks about it in 1984, and he talks about how this stuff worked in the past from a future totalitarian regime filled with doublespeak and newspeak, and he had 2 minutes hate, but I say it's 24/7 hate, available with modern media. And there's aspects of it that are accurate and aspects that are not. It's some weird. It's like for the average thinking man, let's say it's probably like something like being Winston with the cast of Brave New World, right? Look how childlike they are. Look how much their lives have been designed for them. And then look how much over here, You know, like look at the discrepancy between the internal and the external. That's enough to drive anyone insane. Because again, if you're not seen and no one, and you can't trust yourself and you're full of doubt and everyone tells you, at what point do you finally break? And what does that breaking actually entail? Does it completely break your will to live? Can you not conceive of life past that sort of subjugation at that point? You know, like the kind of, you know, like, okay, so Orwell understood that the whole point of a religion and a state and all these things that came into be is like, it was a way to pattern and shape men and women, right? It was a way to shape and pattern the world. And, you know, in the realms of 1984, it is a command, thou art. I think that's what it is, right? That's what it here. Let me bring it up real quick, make sure I don't get it wrong. Cause that one definitely had I read that one at an early age, and just that book, between that and my dad, well, that was because of my dad, because he had the book. Like he did his part to inoculate me.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, here, read these and these and these, and these are mandatory readings. And like, if I had said no, he probably would have kicked me out. And like, people might laugh at that, but he probably would have. Yeah. He's like, nope, I think he didn't want me to become an American.
My dad's never told
me. I mean, don't get me wrong, like he's an American, he's a soldier, but like, look, I would say have him on your podcast, but like you can't. He just says things that are too upsetting. Like he's a soldier, right? Talk about Vietnam, and he's like, yeah, you know, the country's 90% Buddhist and 10% Christian. He's like, you know, it made more sense. You just kill the Christians and win the war that way, right? It's over and done with, boom, right? And it's just like, you know, like he's the closest thing to a Diogenes that I've ever seen in this world, like alive and in the flesh, not writing, not clever trolling, not someone playing a character who runs out of material. And it's really sad to see stuff like that. You know, have you ever seen that? Like the comedian who's trying too hard, or the person who's trying, like, it's so sad.
Yeah.
Oh, it's actually, it reminds me of a lot of our celebrities and stuff like that. I you know, to not, you know, to bring it up, I feel like it degrades the podcast, but I'll say this, I'm glad that you know, that the Cinderella existence that America has been, like, the carriage needed to turn back into a pumpkin. Like the ride doesn't go on forever, you know, like the vision of the past is like, you can't run it on the same engines. You can't, like, it's back. You know what I mean? Like our models are not properly updated for this amount of people and this kind of technology. And, you know, you see how it's all, you see how Americans have both folded on one side, and how things like the notion of like you said, you mentioned it earlier, like a more unified reality that we can agree on for sake of just simplicity, to not even, it's not even like, I would say on a base level, it's not even that we're not trying to offend each other. It's not even from a perspective of like weakness that we have to cower before each other and be paranoid about each other. Because I mean, Christianity itself has instilled all this. Like this was a result, like this is a result of Christianity. Same thing what happened to Europe. It's a lot of paranoia, you know, people turning to the state for their answer.
They think I'm going to hell.
They think, well, they think they're, yeah. And you know, back to moving it forward with Orwell here. Where is it? That's right. It's this one.
I mean, sometimes, like sometimes when I think of 1984, you know how there's like 3 nations and they're all controlled by totalitarian dictators that know everything about you and know where you are at all times.
Yeah, but how do the people actually know that? What if there's more than 3? Like go to North Korea. You know what they're telling their people?
Yeah, that they're like the only nation. But but I wanted to say that I draw on the parallel that right, they have to have faith, like in that there's only 3 nations, right? And that their nations are always at war with the others. And I kind of drew a parallel between that and the 3 monotheistic religions.
Go on.
And how I mean, when you're in kind of a, like, say you're a Christian, right? Mm-hmm. God knows everything about you. He knows like whatever you do, and anything that you do against his will, you'll be tortured or
we got to elicit
turn the other way.
Absolutely.
Right? Mm-hmm. And it's told to them that like all 3 of those nations are like the same, right? But that their nation is like the better one or whatever, right? And that they should hate the other ones or like whatever, right? And they kind of like live in this world, and then and your thoughts in a sense are controlled, right? They're like
Yeah,
Like
mediated,
thought controlled,
controlled, regulated. If I say, hey,
Right.
Greg, tell me how you feel. Now,
Yeah.
if you're smart, Greg, especially if you don't know me very well, you're going to be really careful of how you open up to me
I'll say, I'm
because,
good.
because you know that your vulnerability puts you in danger because I could use that to hurt you.
Yeah.
Right. It's a different, a child doesn't necessarily see that. And apparently neither do adults, but that's neither here nor there. For now, we're okay. So actually, this is funny because this is the little bean counter, right? This is the bean counter. This Big Brother's junior bean counter. And if you actually, okay, I'm going to read it, and then I want to see if you can think of immediately who said something similar recently.
Yeah.
First thing it says, you are a flaw in the pattern. Do you recognize who that is?
In the pattern. That's from 1984, right?
Yes, it's not. Well, it's 1984. But do you remember? Okay, it was Agent Smith said it in The Matrix as well. He said, "You are the flaw in the pattern."
Yeah.
And it's like to an AI, it seems, but the AI's blind spot is it can't even conceive that. No, in fact, it is the virus that multiplied its own virus. It's not that the system is a virus per se. It's that it created and multiplied its own virus. And it was actually up to the human to fix it. The machine couldn't even do it because it has its own blind spot. We are very similar. So according to, this little, again, Big Brother's little bean counter, you are a flaw in the pattern. It's funny, man. I had one of these bean counter types once tell me, sort of shit like Americans say, I guess, said like, you don't even, I think it was something like, you don't even matter. Like, this is even better than when I told you the story about the Christian who said to me, I'm a Christian. I want all Satanists to die. He goes, you don't even matter. And I said, oh God, I said, that's so perfect. I was like, that should be your party's slogan.
Yeah.
Like, you don't even matter. I know, we know you bean counter types been saying this forever. Like Orwell had your number. Huxley had your number. Like, we've heard these thoughts before. They're not original. It's old, bad European philosophy, actually, is what it is, right? It's philosophy from last century. It's like, that's how old it is. Might as well be in the cave age. Might as well be in a very real sense. And this is what I say. And then, you mean, their attitude.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Now, again, you understand the need for order. You understand the need for shaping. We understand the need for teaching. But this is when, when the system seeks to self-contain what it actually is, by then it's like, okay, you might as well kill yourself because like, that's not life. Like, life for us isn't just in a test tube. It's an experience. It's so much more than just words on a page, right? It's so much more than some vague theory that's never going to pan out in reality. It's so much more than our petty illusions and our delusions. And it's why at the heart of all ancient philosophy were the wisest men pointing this out. Heraclitus, Buddha. If you want your modern take, Nietzsche, you got thousands of years of other Eastern philosophy where they also ask these sorts of questions and ideas.
Yeah.
And explore this territory. So your flaw in the pattern, your stain that must be wiped out. Did I not tell you just now we are different from the persecutors of the past? We're not content with negative obedience, nor even with the most abject submission. See, what always stuck out to me in this book, man, what burned a hole into my head was the thing. I'm not even I don't know where it's at in the book, but he says, or it's in this section, but he says, we make the brain perfect before we blow it out. It's not enough for us to let you die a heretic. Like, we are not content to do that. Like, we are better persecutors than those of the past. Like, that's the kind of go-getter attitude you need to be a bean counter of the utmost variety.
Yeah.
Like, when you think we'll organize our society by cattle car and gulag. It's like, oh God, like look at what Jan Christian Pity has brought us.
We'll brainwash you first.
Well, a lot, and amidst that, a lot of repression, and what you're repressing is your real instinct. Like, at what point in there, like, I think about existing, like, if you exist at a time and place and you started yelling, going like, hey guys, pay attention. Like, there's this old essay written from back when called, what's it? It's not on the nature of atrocity, on disbelieving atrocities. It was an essay. Was that?
Who's it by? Do you remember?
Someone who escaped National Socialist Germany and is like, hey, do you see what these people are doing over here? They're like, they're genociding each other on a mass scale. And the rest of the world's like, no, we got too much money invested in that, and we got too much going. Like, no, like we're not going to get involved. And there were people talking about it all over the world, including here in America, and no one wanted to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what he says at the end of that essay is that, you know, so long as this continues, you know, this will be America will remain a farce civilization, because the notion is if we're good moral Christians and a good moral nation, let's say, you know, past, present, or future, then, you know, we would ever do anything about it, you know, or rather than, you know, like it's always been that, you know, these other people are like, well, you know, we got money to make here. What's it matter to us that a few million people get, you know, this, that, or the other? What has anyone ever cared? You know, I guess back to Nixon, when he opened trade with China, like, did any Americans care? Like, hey, you know, they're someday going to have to they're going to have to put nets on their factories to keep their robots on the assembly line from committing suicide.
Yeah.
Right. No one asked those moral questions. And I don't know if I asked you before, but, you know, back to what North Korea tells their people, right? What does China tell their people? You know, and the answer is, well, whatever they want.
Mm.
So you're a flaw in the pattern. Even in the instant of death, we cannot permit any deviation. In the old days, the heretic walked to the stake, still a heretic, proclaiming his heresy, exulting in it. Even the victim of the Russian purges could carry rebellion locked up in his skull as he walked down the passage waiting for the bullet. But we make the brain perfect before we blow it out. The command of this is what I was getting at earlier. The command of the old despotisms was, thou shalt not. The command of the totalitarians was, thou shalt. Our command is, thou art. No one whom we bring to this place ever stands out against us. Everyone is washed clean.
Yeah.
So you want to come over here and step into this river and be washed clean?
No.
Do you want a part of what they got going on?
Have you ever read, it's either Night or Man's Search for Meaning? They're by two different authors. One of them is Elie Wiesel and the other is, I forgot his name, but one of them, I don't remember which one.
That one's Frankl. Viktor Frankl. Oh, yeah, I got something to say.
Frankl is Night or the other one?
Oh, Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Right, but in one of them, they say that, like, oh, like, here, they can torture me, kill all my family and stuff like that, but they can't take away my mind. Now, with that, that's where, like, 1984 becomes, like the worst nightmare, right? That becomes, like, the like hell on earth, right? Because they
or even
they
this
take
question.
your mind.
Do you ever, it might seem silly, you know, related to American media, you ever see Firefly?
Firefly?
Right? Yeah, you know, in which the government assassin says, you know, there's no evil empire, right? And it's like, well, of course he'd say that.
Yeah.
Right? You know, he's a bean counter assassin. But it's funny because, you know, the future, everyone speaks Chinese. It tells you how it played out. You know, within that world, it's like, oh, you know, like, I think Christians might be at odds with Muslims now, but let's say that does play out and China does wind up a world superpower and really, you know, depending on how far they go, you know, but it's still okay. I'll put like, depending on how far they go with it, it's like, well, you know, Islam probably sees what they're doing with their current concentration camps and Muslims, you know, it's like they see that, like, they're not going to forgive, they're not going to forget. It's already within them. It's perfectly fine to fight for themselves and their religion rather than, you know, within Christianity that gets extinguished a bit. You know, it's like, no, there's no chopping heads here, right? Like that's uncivilized. Like, you know, get back in line or be a good Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, at the very least, you know, should that happen, it's like, well, you know, they'll still be fighting with East Bloc weapons, probably, you know, come that time, you know, and this is the long take of history, you know, it's kind of, you look to the future and you go, yeah, what's it going to bring? And it's like, well, you know, these are just some of the ways it could play out. Yeah. Okay. Here's something funny. You brought up Man's Search for Meaning. So what the most striking thing about that book to me was this. I think it was the foreword he wrote, you know, years after he first published it, because he debated doing it anonymously and all these other things. But there's a reason, you know, he said there's reasons for why he did what he did. But he said the most striking thing to him about it, he says it's in the introduction, these are sentiments because I'm not going to get the words right. He said it's something along the lines of that people come to him and are, you know, that modern people come to him, you know, this is like even in the 60s and 70s, I want to say, you know, well after World War II. because he was a concentration camp survivor, in case that hasn't been made explicit to anyone who hasn't heard or read or what it may be.
Yeah.
But and he says what strikes him the most is that people tell like, oh, it's inspiring to them. And his thoughts are, what's so otherwise like horrible about modern life that like people actually seem to need to delve into this, that that they aren't suffering enough, that they aren't experiencing great pains to understand great pleasures, to understand, to have a modicum of respect or maybe even tolerance for life. Not just love or happiness, but tolerance for life. Because the way people carry on, even this bean counter from 1984, right? It's like, dude, it's otherwise so horrible. It's like, we need to suppress it all. We need to control it all. Like, to them, life is a dead thing to be controlled and animated. It's a puppet, right? It's a puppet and it needs strings.
Yeah, I read that in high school, actually. It was like
which one?
Both of them, Night and A Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah, no, it's good reading. Do you read, how about this? Do you read a lot of the other works of horror out of the 19th century? Books from ranging anything about, just war itself to all the totalitarian regimes to
European I read history Anne Frank, Animal Farm. I read 1984, Arabian World.
What about military history? Because I think a lot of people miss out on this stuff. They don't read, like, they'll study other things, but they don't study like criminology. They don't study psychology, military history, things
I
like
learned
that.
Like some.
Oh, you definitely get it. Okay.
Military. Well, I mean, like, I took like a lot of history classes.
Yeah. No, of course. No. Yeah. No. I know you're working. You're well rounded and always working on it. So it's good student, right? I mean, what more could you ask for, right?
There was my U.S. history teacher. He had us watch this like video. Have you ever heard of Bikini Island?
Yes.
Yeah, he had us watch this documentary about Bikini Island and like our nuke tests out there. And
did we have time to think about that or bother? I mean, because even because you just think the carelessness. Oh, tell you what, go on, and then.
Yeah, it's just like oh my god, like the carelessness of like the United States, like why are they playing with explosives? Like, they're playing with explosives. That's what they're doing. Like, they're not even
right. What happens if we put this? Well, I mean, it's an outgrowth, right?
Like,
what if we put this bottle rocket? What if we put this bottle rocket in this cake? What if we put this nuke in this island? Well, the bigger issue is it's unthinking. And it is childish. And the bigger issue is that we didn't realize how much of this shit was going to connect to us. And I don't mean this as like, I mean this as a scientist and not a hippie or tree lover, is that like people don't understand just how polluted the United States is in terms of like you could say that there's chances are they're not even aware of the local agencies that handle whatever type of environmental contamination you may be talking about, from a burnt out meth lab to medical waste. Someone gets hit by a train, that's a medical report. That goes on a medical list. A few gallons of oil spill somewhere, that might be on a list somewhere. Right? Like, because with certain chemicals, they go right down to the water table, right? They cut straight through concrete, right? This is what happens with strong solvents. So you have, like let's say in California, where you had a lot of, the groundwater there is still undrinkable. It's still polluted. And this was from the necessity of manufacturing in World War II itself. So you have all these large groundwater tables that are still being decontaminated.
Like aquifers?
Yes. They're fully contaminated. In the San Gabriel Valley, in the San Fernando Valley, like there's these giant contamination problems. And, it's not, but here's the thing. Modern life is such that you can live there without even knowing that. Mm-hmm. That's how much we've dominated people as such have dominated, because it's otherwise also a desert, and you need a lot of water to live in a desert.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who live in that desert. Mm-hmm. And it's like, again, did they think that through? And it's like, okay, it's not a matter of morality. It's a matter of wasting resources. It's a matter, right? Like we're beyond, you could apply morality to it, but it's beyond good and evil. It's like so much of it's just stupid and wasteful. So much of it's, or sometimes insulting to your intelligence, but or, you see, maybe a waste of the taxpayers' money. So let's see here. It's like you see it just when they can't get any dumber, they somehow surprise you.
Yeah.
Or an unthinking. Now we'll go back to Emerson.
So I'm thinking, yeah. I mean, we're like an hour in? Yeah, maybe
That's
we
good.
should. No, we're like an hour. Yeah, probably like an hour 15 in.
Okay, well, now we're just getting back to where we left off last time, so it's good.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's kind of first principle stuff.
These are the voices which we hear in solitude, but they grow faint and inaudible as we enter into the world. Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. Society is a joint stock company, which the members agree, for the better securing of his bread to each shareholder, to surrender the liberty and culture of the eater. The virtue, in most requests, is conformity. Self-reliance is its aversion. It's love, not realities and creators, but names and customs.
Right. So, and again, like, Nietzsche could have written that, right? So
that's the stain in the puzzle, or the stain in the pattern.
The virtue in most request is conformity. Self-reliance is its aversion. Right. Like, what are you doing? You're going, like, don't go against, go with. And you say, well, where are we going? And then when you realize, like, oh, no one can actually answer you.
Yeah.
Like Nietzsche asked, right? Like, okay, well, it turns out, we didn't have a plan or purpose all along, right? It's a pretty profound thing to realize, 2,000 years into history, let's say, going like, oh, wait, like, we thought that like they were just waiting. They were waiting for the end of the world. They were continuing on. They were consolidating power, trying to retain power, right? This is natural, right? It's the will to power.
Yeah.
It's, let's see. The virtue in most request is conformity, self-reliance. It loves, this reminds me of Nietzsche most. It loves not realities and creators, but names and customs. That makes me think of, it's almost, speaking of a musical call, Zarathustra, right? Mm-hmm. Companions the creator seeketh, not corpses.
Yeah.
It loves not realities and creators, but names and customs.
Yeah.
Right. That's the inverse, rather.
Yes, it is.
Whereas self-reliance loves realities and creators.
Yeah.
So
I'm
you want to go on with the next one?
Yeah. So whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it is to be goodness. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world. I remember an answer which, when quite young, I was prompted to make to a valued advisor, who was wont to importune me with the dear old doctrines of the church, on my saying, what have I to do with the sacredness of traditions, if I live wholly from within? My friend suggested, but these impulses may be from below, not from above. I replied, they do not seem to me to be such, but if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. No law can be sacred to me, but that of my nature.
Oh yeah, see, look at that. That's good, right? Do you actually see do you see the kernel in that though? Do you see what it is? I'm thinking one word.
Power.
Not just power. Well, it's funny because it's capital D devil, right? But that's the Antichrist.
Yeah.
Right. My friend suggested, but these impulses may be from below, not from above. I replied, they do not seem to me as such. But if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. He's perfectly fine with being an antichrist, right? He's not doing it with the bombast of Nietzsche, and he doesn't present it in the same way, but he has his own, well, I'll use his words, which I think he says eventually. He has his own stern claim and perfect circle. That's what Emerson says.
Yeah.
So,
so be it, right?
Yes, that is his command, that is his decree, and it's to his own, just like he illustrates here, right? This reminds me of, where was it? What have I to do with sacredness of traditions, the sacredness of traditions, if I live wholly from within? Mm-hmm. Right? He's not, and it gets into that notion from above of absolve you to yourself, right? It's the antithesis to the government being counter. It's the antithesis to the excited conformist or totalitarian or weirdo or, with their strange idea, like, if that notion is basically the Apollinian gone wrong, right? Because the Apollinian doesn't have to be an artist, but they do uphold the artist's vision, you could say. That's what an Apollinian might, right? And I guess these days we tend to call them conservatives, and liberals are more what you would consider a free spirit. And I mean like Zap's free spirit, because most liberals, it's like you see that they're not liberated spirits, as Nietzsche says. They've just scrubbed the conscious mind clean. They're not actually free from much anything. They're still wrapped in illusions and delusions. Yeah, I guess Nietzsche would call it human all too human.
Yes, he would.
Right? Like we actually, again, this revolution's come full circle. Time is a flat circle. So, yeah, I guess that's good for now. No, okay, wait. There's a few things, right? A few things come to mind from Nietzsche, right? Both the notion that the exception can't be the rule, but for those who feel the bounding of the tiger's blood and aren't content with surrogate power, and those who do feel the need to aspire, whatever it is, let's say we'll call it maybe a will, maybe even a will to power, let's say, for those who do feel that and who aren't ashamed of it, and who, especially if they've gotten rid of their pity, that's where we get into this territory, right? No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature, right? Like now you're beyond these engines that previously drove us forward that are now holding us back. Like now you're beyond the convention. Like, because this is the issue with all convention, is that experiences like fashion is like, what worked yesterday might not pass today. And again, you could say, well, doesn't that seem arbitrary? Because aren't we the ones who create fashions and all these other things? And it's like, yeah, but don't aspire. Like, it's not a question of free will. Like that's a very idealistic or romantic way of viewing the world. Yeah. It assumes agency and self-reliance where there may be none. So the exception can't be the rule. And I think Zarathustra says something along the lines of, I'm a law unto me. And maybe he says, and maybe a few others, or those who would be laws unto themselves. I can't remember the exact law words and or sentiment, but he speaks to this. So go ahead and skip past the notes that we didn't read. Oh yeah, and in case we do inevitably wind up posting the finalized notes someday, or I guess maybe sooner or not, because we did have some people ask, know that we're reading almost none of my notes that are already there. We're just talking, and we've also brought in a few things that aren't in here. So
yeah, well, we have read.
Yeah, we're reading what you for certain. We're reading Self-Reliance, and you can follow along with that in wherever we're at on any given time. So at the very least, they have that.
Yeah, exactly. And you definitely, I mean, if you, I would highly recommend reading through, once I actually post the notes. I'll probably wait to post the notes.
Don't do it yet, because I'm also thinking shoot, I just did this in a few minutes. I was typing in all caps and stuff just to
but dude,
notes. There's typos and stuff. I wasn't I didn't necessarily intend to make it legible.
No, but
to others,
man, if you sent this into a philosophy professor who teaches Nietzsche, man, this would be a gold mine. Seriously.
He'd have to pay me.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you send him my work? You kidding me? Not like it's online for free or anything.
Yeah, well, he'll find that out later after he pays you, right?
Yeah. Is the boy? No, that okay.
Okay, so we continuing on with the essay?
Yeah, but again back to my illegible notes. Where is it even at? Do you know where we're at?
Yeah, you actually have a lot of, you have pages of, you have probably 5 pages of notes before we get back to the next part of the essay.
Okay. Would you got a page number for me?
Oh, where
Self-Reliance picks
page
up.
17.
Okay, thank you. There we go. Yeah, see. Yeah. Why'd you let me take so many notes?
Okay. Good and bad, but names very readily transferable to that.
Oh, wait, hold on, real quick. I also wanted to segue into his essay Nature because he talks about language in there. And again, it's proto-Nietzsche. It's proto-Nietzsche, and I recommend it to everybody, anybody and everybody. I mean, it's a good essay, period. But you see a lot of kernels in there. And I think, specifically, there's a line in there. It's like, that's the genealogy of morals. He nailed it on the head right there. Nietzsche made that a project of his and ran with it. Like a lot of Nietzsche, it's like, again, you could see the musical calls and answers. And even if it existed in in Schopenhauer's Educator at a time earlier in his works where you could say Nietzsche wasn't himself, the liberated personality that he became, free to write as he did and do as he did, and it cost him, I don't know that, it wasn't just like, for all that he says is bombastic and as self-assured as he comes off, is that he took a lot of chances writing what he wrote, and he was actually very calculating in what he wrote. Like it wasn't anything goes. He didn't write like that. It's very
could have been killed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But he approached his time and place and people on the right enough angle to get in there. And at the very least, they could go, look, he's one of our eccentric curiosities. Like, people like him. So, if the rest of the world recognizes our genius in him, we'll claim him. It's actually like, you know what I mean? Like like he was beyond everyone in his place and time.
Yeah.
And this opens up a whole nother realm of thought. So we left off just at the last paragraph was cut because we stopped to talk about it for a bit. But this is continuing on with that same paragraph after, Emerson's own Antichrist.
Mm. Good and bad are but names very readily transferable to that or this. The only right is what is after my constitution. The only wrong, what is against it. A man is to carry himself in the presence of all opposition, as if everything were titular and ephemeral, but he. I'm ashamed to think how easily we capitulate to badges and names, to large societies and dead institutions. Every dissent and well-spoken individual affects and sways me more than is right. They ought to go upright and vital and speak the rude truth in all ways. If malice and vanity wear the coat of philanthropy, shall that pass? If an angry bigot assumes this bountiful cause of abolition and comes to me with his last news from Barbados, why should I not say to him, go love thy infant, love thy wood chopper, be good-natured and modest, have that grace, and never vanquish your hard, uncharitable ambition with this incredible tenderness for black folk 1,000 miles off. Thy love afar is spite at home. Rough and graceless would be such greeting, but truth is handsomer than the affection of love. Your goodness must have some edge to it, else it is none. The doctrine of hatred must be preached as the counteraction of the doctrine of love when the pools and wines. I shun father and mother and wife and brother when my genius calls me. I would write on the lintels of the doorpost, whim. I hope it is somewhat better than whim at last, but we cannot spend the day in explanation. Expect me not to show cause why I seek or why I exclude the company. Then, again, do not tell me, as a good man did today, of my obligation to put all poor men in good situations. Are they my poor? I tell thee, thou foolish philanthropist, that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to such men as do not belong to me and to whom I do not belong. There is a class of persons to whom, by all spiritual affinity, I am bought and sold. For them, I will go to prison, if need be. But your miscellaneous popular charities, the education at the College of Fools, the building of meeting houses to the vain end, to which many now stand, alms to sots, and the thousandfold relief societies, though I confess with shame, I sometimes succumb and give the dollar. It is a wicked dollar, which by and by I shall have the manhood to withhold.
Yeah, so that's pretty powerful. First off, you see that he hates his own pity, or at the very least, he has contempt for it.
Yeah.
Right, from that, just coming off that last bit, right? I told you in the first podcast, we'd get to pity.
Are they my poor?
Well, Good question. So good and bad are but names, back to the top, right, of this, or at least where we left off here. Good and bad are but names, very readily transferable to this or that. The only right is what is after my constitution. The only wrong is what is against it. What's this sound like? This sounds like a will to me.
Yeah, that's will.
Right. He's drawing a dividing line,
Yeah, and he's also talking about beyond good and evil at the same time, right?
Yes.
Like he's talking about going beyond good and evil.
Yes.
So you can see where like Nietzsche, like he certainly picked up.
Oh, it's in here. Yes.
Yeah. What he wrote.
He's to carry himself in the presence of all opposition, as if everything were titular and ephemeral, but he. And that's the sense you get. You read Nietzsche, and it's like, well, out of everything from the stupid ages over in Europe, it's like Nietzsche's one of the few survivors, right? And it's like, well, why is that?
Yeah.
And it's like because of that opposition. And again, he paid a price for that, from the birth of tragedy and all the criticism he got from the College of Fools, right? Going like, you can't see things in a different or new way. Like, what are you doing, young man? Like, we know you're a genius, but you can't be doing this. Right. And it's like, well, shit, if Nietzsche can't do it, who can?
Yeah.
So I am ashamed to think how easily we capitulate to badges and names, to large societies and dead institutions, and this is a question of vitality.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, with, I don't know for the differences in people, why some people are more inoculated to the madness, let's say, and some people just fold like nothing. And I think of this, right? How, for a nation that supposedly prides itself on independence and bravery, even though you could say modern America is moving more in it seems to be like the main code is pity now. All right, and I guess we've been moving in this direction a long time, but it's coming to a head.
Mm-hmm.
So large societies and dead institutions. Every decent and well-spoken individual affects and sways me more than is right. Right. So he's admitting to something here, and it's the notion that, like, if I see that the lights are on and someone's home, I'll give you the time of day, but there's no reason your words should sway me. Like I have to go upright and vital and speak the rude truth in all ways, and for people, by all accounts, Thoreau was very prickly. Thoreau was Emerson. I don't recall, I've only read so much of, even though these are usually good things to understand, right? Like not just their philosophy, but the time they lived, what they went through, what shaped them, all these things help understanding not just an individual psychology, but also what inspired them or what moved them. And what I guess you could say, it's kind of like what you're really looking at is how they leveraged their power, whatever that might have been. Like that's what you're actually studying in these cases.
Yeah.
If malice and vanity were the code of philanthropy, right? So he's saying it here. Pity is both vanity and malice, and you see that pity is like in Nietzsche. I sent you that from the Nietzsche sub Reddit. I sent you Levin Smaller's page of pity. Like we'll have to include that in the show notes, right? Because that is quite, that's an incredible write up there, right? How much he talks about it, because it's, for such a small word, it's a 4-letter word at that, right? That there's so much in it,
Yeah, that was a really thorough post.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, it covers it pretty well, but right now we're just covering the vanity of it, right? That you can put your pity, you can have a whole parade, and and you can wear it, and people will they'll be happy with you in their pity, I guess.
Yeah.
And malice is just, you see that, well, if you reject pity, what happens? Well, they're not going to be happy with you. So where's the code of philanthropy? And shall that pass? So he's asking a question. Related to earlier. If an angry bigot assumes this bountiful cause, right? So if an angry bigot assumes the bountiful cause of pity, in this case, he says abolition, and comes to me, remember, because this is before the Civil War even happened. Yeah. And so in this, actually, I'm going to break for a story here. A good friend of mine told me this story, and I think it's very important, especially for modern Americans, that, he travels and he teaches and he does a lot of different things. But he tells a story of, he's a bachelor teaching over in Europe and doing his thing. And, he's talking about how his American friends would say things like, I wish I could have what you have. I wish I could do what you do. And, these are family people, right? They got families and friends and kids and babies. And then he asks them seriously, and, not cynically, right? Because there's a difference, but you have love, you have this other stuff, a lot of people would would love to have that. There's a lot of people who want a relationship or a family or children or whatever the case may be, but due to whatever reasons, assuming it's not, incompetence or something else, right? For whatever reason, they can't have it. It's like, yeah, it's a weird thing to say, why would you otherwise, if we, especially as a Christian nation that came from Christianity and, modern American liberalism is absolutely Christian. It's Christian to the core, the whole notion. The only reason we're here talking about this stuff, like we would have been, easily burnt at the stake or imprisoned or any number of things for talking, even Emerson's Antichrist, right? I mentioned it earlier, that he could get away with saying that back when. Mm-hmm. See, I'm just looking here. So he asked them, but you have love. And then in that right there, that's a meditation unto itself. It's like, well, okay, is love actually enough for people? Or at least our modern conception of love or whatever it is people are doing in their relationships. Why is the grass always greener? And well, it seems like it's always been this way, right? The world's always been said to be on fire. Desire has always caused suffering, etc.
Well, I mean, love is the nutrients that we pack inside of heavy backpacks as we climb to the top of the mountain.
Yeah. Inevitably food, you do carry, you carry that weight somewhere, Yeah.
And you need it, but it could be poison if you're not careful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. How would you, how would you know? Because especially coming from being a kid, like you didn't know if, like you assumed that when an adult was feeding you, they were giving you something with some nutrition or something that was edible. How did you in fact know that they weren't poisoning? That's on the most basis of we're talking about bread, but
yeah. Continue your story. Sorry.
But again, bread. Oh, that's just it. It's just that reflection. Like, isn't love? Why isn't love enough? And if love isn't enough, then pity certainly isn't enough.
Yeah.
Like, what's that going to get you? He says it right here. Go love thy infant, love thy woodchopper, be good natured and modest, have that grace. Right. These are Apollinian dictates. Never varnish your heart uncharitable ambition with this incredible tenderness. Thy love afar is spite at home. Right. Like you see it in modern people. Right. They'll like you can be a complete derelict and fuck off so long as you can actively destroy things, so long as you're filled with pity for everyone and everything outside of your like self-destructive zone, and your self-destructive zone become communal destructive zone. And what we've seen in America in the last few years, I mean, it's been, on and off through the years, right? Because again, this country, this divide is old. These issues are old. Like here we are once again.
Yes.
Rough and graceless would be such greeting, but truth is handsomer than the affectation of love. Right? Truth is handsomer
than the affectation of love.
Yeah. See, I don't like some things are just perfect, and you don't want to add or take away. Your goodness must have some edge to it, else it is none. Right? And why is that? And it's like, well, it's again, it seems to be the nature of life. Yeah. Like if you're not gonna if you're to do anything but stagnate, then there must always be some force. There must always be some will.
Yeah, and what happens when you have stagnant water?
Oh, like the disease, all sorts of problems.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
The doctrine of hatred must be preached as a counteraction of the doctrine of love. When that pulse, this actually reminds me of Slayer. I have my own philosophy. I hate everyone equally. You can't tear that out of me. No separation, no segregation, just me and my world of enemies. Right? That's pretty good. Mm. So goodness must have some edge to it, else it is none. The doctrine of hatred must be preached. Of love when that pure, it's so hatred is preached as a counteraction of the doctrine of love when that pules and whines, meaning it is no longer love. It's just a hollow shell. It actually reminds me of a song. Do you know the lead singer of he was in the Gorillaz, but he's done a bunch of stuff. But they got this song back when he was in Blur. I forget the name of the song. Yeah, he's the lead singer of Blur, the lead singer of Gorillaz. Oh yeah, no, he did some great covers too, man. The guy's a very talented musician. But he's got this song called, I don't remember what it's called, but he says love's the greatest thing, and it's sung actually in the fashion of an old American spiritual, because remember he's British.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So but it's got the gospel tones, and that comes from America.
Yeah.
And in that song, he says, I'm waiting for that feeling. I'm waiting for that feeling to come. And in that song, he's like, the lines are there. I'm waiting for the day for the demons to go away. And I think it's a very excellent example of these demons we call love in Christianity.
Yeah.
We'll put, I'll put it in the show notes. We'll figure it out. The song. I wish I could remember the name right now.
Right.
Yes.
Found it at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, or maybe there's such a thing, or maybe it's this. Maybe there's such a thing as too much love, right? Yeah. Like you go too soft on the children. It's just as bad as permanent revenge.
Yeah.
Because that's actually what you're instilling. I mean, it is permanent revenge. That's what we're seeing. It's pity over and over again. It's a hollow shell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to overuse the metaphor, but if you eat all your food at once, I mean, you're just going to get too tired and you won't be able to make it to the top.
Oh yeah, you run into a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
It's a question of also why, it could be lack of discipline, could be who knows what.
Yeah.
Or usually I think it's a matter of course corrections in sight. You never know.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. How many times in your life can you say like someone pointed something out to you and course corrected you on something that you saw would otherwise have been bad for you or stupid for you, or, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Someone pointed something out for me, and
it might not have been much, but
if they didn't, then I would have been like fucked. Right.
Yeah. You could have either made a big mistake. You could have or, and maybe that's a learning experience too. And maybe you need that too, because
that's happened to me many times.
Right. And then there's a question, right? And I guess we're back to the beginning. The first is the same as the last. So we could ask, good, bad, should we be loving people more? And it's like, well, maybe they don't even know what anything, maybe they don't know
what love is.
Yes. And maybe they can't see that without understanding just how hard life has been for people here, and just how brutal and unloving and punishing and cruel humanity has always been, and how punishing and cruel our religions have always been.
Yeah. You got to tell someone when they're getting a little bit too close to the edge.
Yeah. And then a lot of times you don't realize. And so, him saying, that he ought to go rough and for the hard truth, that's why he's doing it. Like, this is what actual love looks like.
Yeah.
Right. Not this pity crap. Not this concern with things that don't even concern you when you're neglecting your own family, your own friends, your own world that's right in front of you. It's like, well, what are you building with your life? Are you creating? Oh shit. You're a corpse in the making. They never see it either. Have you ever read the poem by Bukowski, The Genius of the Crowd?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Maybe you open with that one next time.
All right.
Right. That might be a good place to begin, right? Because there's some American genius for you.
Yeah, I will.
Right, he's our poet laureate of Yonder Trash Heap.
Yeah, he was like, I've heard some of his poems spoken like on YouTube, just like read aloud.
Yeah, good stuff.
They're good, like the don't try.
That's on.
It says don't.
That's
try.
On his grave. Yeah.
Go all the way, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, he also means it too, because he talks about the best thing in the world is a good night's sleep. You see how people back to, if like we're thinking and we're trying and we're doing all these things, it's like you see how if you're lost in the labyrinth, you easily stress yourself out. Sometimes drink a glass of warm milk, get a good night's sleep, and you might actually, it's again, if you're going hard and you're really searching and seeking, and if you're really, again, you're not content with surrogate power and you're willing something inside yourself, and you're willing to go the distance, if you're willing to do as Odin did, and pull out your own eye, if you're willing to do as Nietzsche did, and
right, with your blood,
right, and if you're willing to go as Emerson goes, right here, I shun father and mother and wife and brother when my genius calls me. Right, Nietzsche did that. He paid the price for it too. It wasn't free and easy for him. I would write on the lintels and the doorpost, whim, right, just WHIM. I hope it is somewhat better than when at last, right? This is hilarious to me, right? Like it could be anything. It could be whim, it could be will, it could be you name it. But he's just saying we can't spend the day in explanation, right? Eventually you got to draw your lines. Yeah. Expect me not to show cause why I seek or why I exclude company. Then again, do not, right? Like, do we need to, should we explain that? What do you think? Pretty self-explanatory? I think so.
Yeah.
Right? He's just asking. Like,
expect me not to.
Yeah, don't ask me to explain myself. Yeah. Then again, do not tell me, as a good man did today, that my obligation is to put all poor men in. See, this is funny. This reminds me of, I don't remember if it was Kurt Vonnegut Jr. himself, more American genius, or if it was one of our homegrown socialists back from, early, last century or so, who said something along the lines of, it's all well and good to, and people who come from the bottom of the trash heap, especially if they left the bottom of the trash heap, especially if they willed themselves out of it, they understand this and they understand how hateful life is at the bottom. And it goes, it's all well and good to have sympathy and try to help the poor people, but understand that they're often mean, stupid, ignorant, hateful, disgusting, lazy, whatever themselves. Don't sit here and to sit here and pretend like poverty or no poverty, to pretend like either is a moral position, to pretend like either by default affords you a moral position, it is pure nonsense. It is pure rubbish. It's as much rubbish as pity itself. Mm-hmm. That's how bad it is. It's utter poison. So this is why he says it. I shun father and mother and wife and brother when my genius calls me. He's distancing himself. I would write on the lintels and doorposts, whim, can't spend the day in explanation. Expect me not to show cause, why I seek or why I exclude company. Then again, do not tell me as a good man did. Okay, we read all this. Are they my poor? I tell thee, thou foolish philanthropist, that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to such men as do not belong to me and whom I do not belong. Because it's like, here's the thing. Right? This is like, we've come full circle in Christianity, right? They're uttering prayers in the streets. They're talking about how moral they are, right? We're back to like the difference is there's no Jesus here to flip the table. Like the tables have just been flipping over and over again, right? So he judges, he grudges every last dollar, dime, and cent. You know what? I draw a line too. So do I. I give to such men as do not belong to me and whom I do not belong. I love this. But here's the thing. This is how you know he's a gangster. This is how you know he's down. This is how you know he's the utmost wise man, because he does say this. And Nietzsche, to me, Nietzsche's work is actually for this end. Yeah. There's a class of person to whom by all spiritual affinity I am bought and sold. For them I will go to prison if need be. Like that was, to me, that's why Nietzsche did what he did. Mm-hmm. He, Zarathustra was a book for all and none. And and it might as well be like, if you can actually understand this, and if you can get through this, and if you can will yourself thus, to anything beyond, beyond these stupid ages, beyond these dark ages, beyond living in a mind and body and physiology and a thought process that is hundreds and thousands of years out of humanity's past, right? It's a living, it's like, living fossils are real. We found them before. We're one of them. Mm-hmm. I think this is why Nietzsche called modern man the last man. Like, and he even said it's going to go on the longest. And it's like, why wouldn't it? Like sheer mediocrity, of course, can sustain itself for the longest. Yeah. Right? Like that's like you can imagine there was some golden mean in our evolution where our bodies and minds were fit for our environment. And then as we further abstracted, articulated, and actually learned, right? Because it wasn't just blind, it wasn't blind. Thought has never been blind abstraction. When people say, oh, like, get your head out of the clouds, it's like, well, in many realms of thought, sure, right? If you're being delusional or if you're following illusions, let's say, you don't want your head in the clouds. But with imagination itself, again, you ask an adult, what's this newspaper for? He's going to give you like 3 or 4 answers. A child will give you 30, easy.
Yeah.
So
a child will give you 30 answers. That's the beauty of creativity.
Yes.
Let's end it there.
And it turns out that's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait. Okay, but a few last lines. There's a class person. Okay, I would go to prison if need be. But your miscellaneous popular charities, the education at the College of Fools, right? These are the dead institutions, right? We see them, we can smell them from over here, right? The building of meeting houses to the vain end to which many now stand. I like this line, alms to sots. You know what a sot is, Greg?
No.
It's an idiot. And the thousandfold relief societies, though I confess with shame, I sometimes succumb and give the dollar. It is a wicked dollar, which by and by I shall have the manhood to withhold. Right? That is powerful. He recognizes that this pity is effeminate and it's weak and it destroys not just people, but nations. And that's why the notion of that aspect of self-reliance is important in the sense that you take care of you and yours, you know, you can maintain in such a manner, right? Back to what is an actual ethos of action. And it's like, well, back to Odin and back to the Norse, it's about balance. It was actually never about the fight between good and evil. It was about balance. That's what human civilization is about. Or it's an important aspect because when it's imbalanced, we see what happens. Just like in an individual, you get a mental illness and these other problems. So withhold your wicked dollars. And I wish you the manhood to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's,
you create it for yourself.
I mean, all life, it has this like homeostasis property to it where we need to reach an equilibrium to stay put, right? But
yeah, well,
yeah,
and then the right, and where's the optimum? It's like, dude, for some people, they're not going to be happy staying put, so they always have to be pushing the boundaries, you know, and that's, you know, that's a will and that's an aspect of nature itself too. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll continue on with part 3 next time, and we'll try to get a little bit more.
Wait. I got to know, are they in a hurry? Where are they trying to go?
But right, I mean, you got to get to the end.
But Emerson, no, I got to go too. But Emerson has his stern claim and his perfect circle, and we got to give that its fair due. That's all. I mean, in the whole course of the essay. So, good stuff. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Thank you for listening.